Have you ever wondered how a voice worth millions simply disappears from the global stage without a trace? Tonight, we're peeling back the curtain on one of the most baffling trajectories in modern music history. In 2012, a 17-year-old boy with a shy demeanor and a voice that seemed to vibrate the very air around him stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage. Within 90 seconds, Jonathan Antoine wasn't just a contestant, he was a global phenomenon. Simon Cowell, usually the harshest critic in the room, didn't just offer praise, he offered a future. But as the years rolled by, the stadium tour and the constant media presence began to flicker and fade. To the casual observer, it looked like another case of a reality TV star burning out under the neon lights. But the reality is far more complex and, frankly, far more gripping. We've spent weeks digging into the timeline of Jonathan's career, looking at the gaps between the albums and the long silences on social media. What we found wasn't a story of a lost talent, but a story of a man who was fighting a silent war against an industry that wanted him to be something he wasn't. The next Pavarotti label wasn't just a compliment. It was a weight that nearly crushed him. As we investigate the unexpected turn his life has taken in 2026, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the moments the cameras didn't capture, to understand why this vocal powerhouse had to walk away from everything he worked for. It's a journey through the highs of sudden wealth and the lows of a mental health crisis that was kept hidden from the public eye for over a decade. This isn't just a music report. It's a study in survival in the digital age. Behind the soaring, high notes was a young man who had been told since the age of 4 that he didn't belong in this world. Our investigation into Jonathan's early years reveals a pattern of systemic hardship that most fans never realized. While he was developing one of the most technically proficient voices of his generation, he was simultaneously enduring a level of social isolation that would break most adults. From the tender age of 4, Jonathan was the victim of relentless, targeted bullying. This wasn't just playground teasing. It was a sustained campaign that forced him to view the world as a hostile environment. Sources close to his early development describe a child who used music as a literal shield, a way to create a barrier between himself and a reality that was too painful to inhabit. By the time he stood before the judges in 2012, he wasn't just nervous. Reports indicate he was actually in the midst of a profound nervous breakdown. He had been diagnosed with severe depression at just 13 years old. The industry, however, saw his hesitation as a charming narrative for a television show. They leaned into the shy boy trope because it made for good ratings, but they ignored the underlying psychological scars that were deepening with every flash of a paparazzi camera. We've looked into the records of his time at the Royal Academy of Music, and even there, the pressure was mounting. He was being pushed toward a traditional operatic path that didn't account for his fragile state. This foundational trauma is the key to understanding why his later disappearance wasn't a choice of laziness, but a desperate act of self-preservation. He was a man with a million-pound voice and a 10-cent support system, and the cracks were beginning to show long before the first album even hit the shelves. What if the personality traits the media labeled as difficult or reclusive were actually signs of a condition Jonathan didn't even know he had? For years, rumors circulated within the industry that Jonathan was unpredictable or hard to work with behind the scenes. Publicists struggled to manage his aversion to crowded press events, and the diva rumors began to swirl in the tabloid press. However, our reporting has uncovered a major turning point that occurred in 2022, which completely recontextualizes every single controversy in his career. At the age of 27, Jonathan Antoine was officially diagnosed with autism. This revelation was the missing piece of the puzzle. For his entire life, Jonathan had been navigating a world that felt fundamentally wrong to him. Sensory overload, the intense pressure of social cues, and the rigid expectations of the music industry weren't just hurdles. They were physical barriers. When we look back at his career through the lens of this diagnosis, his behavior takes on a whole new meaning. The times he belied on appearances or seemed distant in interviews weren't acts of defiance. They were symptoms of a man whose brain was being overwhelmed by a world not built for him. This diagnosis allowed Jonathan to finally stop apologizing for who he was. It gave him the language to explain to his management, and eventually his fans, why the traditional pop star lifestyle was toxic to his well-being. But this discovery came with its own set of challenges. How does a neurodivergent artist survive in a neurotypical industry that demands constant on time? This tension is what led to the most dramatic shift in his career, a shift that saw him walking away from major label security to find a way to exist on his own terms, even if it meant losing the mainstream fame he had achieved. The most successful duo in BGT history didn't just drift apart. They were caught in a tug-of-war between friendship and a multi-million-dollar contract. One of the most frequent questions we encountered during our research was the nature of the split between Jonathan and his singing partner, Charlotte Jaconelli. When they first appeared, they were inseparable, the perfect Beauty and the Beast vocal pairing. But after just 2 albums and a massive rise to fame, the partnership dissolved. For years, speculators whispered about infighting or secret romances gone wrong, but the reality we've uncovered is much more professional and arguably more tragic. The duo was signed to a deal that many insiders describe as stifling. They were being molded into a specific brand of easy listening that didn't allow for individual growth. As Jonathan's mental health struggles intensified, the pressure to maintain the duo image became a source of immense friction, not between the singers themselves, but between the artists and the corporate machine. We've learned that the decision to go solo was actually a mutual realization that they were 2 very different people with 2 very different needs. Charlotte wanted to pursue musical theater and a more traditional celebrity path, while Jonathan was beginning to realize that the machine was killing his love for music. The split wasn't a divorce in the tabloid sense. It was a tactical retreat. However, the industry didn't make it easy. Walking away from a guaranteed brand meant starting from zero. Jonathan had to prove he was more than just half of a duo, a task that proved much harder than anyone anticipated. It led to a period of professional isolation where many believed his career was over. But in reality, he was just beginning to find his solo voice for the very first time, away from the shadows of a partner and the demands of a massive label. Just as he was finding his footing, a series of personal tragedies threatened to push Jonathan back into total silence. The years 2024 and 2025 were perhaps the most trying of Jonathan's life, and our sources indicate that he nearly walked away from music entirely during this period. Beyond the professional struggles, Jonathan faced a series of deep personal losses. He has often spoken about his cats, Polly and Pandora, as his primary emotional anchors. For a man who struggled with human social dynamics due to his late-diagnosed autism, these animals were more than pets. They were his bridge to the world. When they both passed away after 20 years by his side, the impact was catastrophic. Insiders describe a period of total withdrawal where Jonathan retreated into what he now calls the Antoine Multimedia Compound. This wasn't just a home studio, it was a fortress. For months, there were concerns about whether he would ever return to the public eye. But it was within this fortress that the unexpected turn truly began. Instead of letting the grief consume him, Jonathan began to use his technical skills he had been quietly hunting for years, to become his own producer, engineer, and director. He stopped waiting for a label to tell him what to sing. He began experimenting with sounds that the classical world would never allow. This period of isolation, which many misinterpreted as a career dead end, was actually a chrysalis phase. He was rebuilding himself from the ground up, turning his compound into a hub of independent creativity. He was no longer a product of a TV show. He was becoming a self-contained media entity. This transition was a massive gamble. Would his fans follow him into this new, more experimental, and deeply personal territory? The boy who once couldn't look a judge in the eye has been replaced by a man who is now calling all the shots in a way that has the industry stunned. As we move into early 2026, the transformation is complete. Jonathan Antoine has just released All of Me, a project that represents the most significant, unexpected turn of his career. This isn't the operatic cover music we've come to expect. It is a bold, independent statement that blends his classical training with modern, cinematic production. But the real story isn't just the music, it's the business model. Jonathan has effectively exposed the flaws of the old industry by succeeding without them. He is now operating entirely outside the major label system, utilizing direct-to-fan platforms and his own production house. Our analysis shows that his engagement levels are higher now than they were during his mainstream peak. Why? Because the audience is finally seeing the real Jonathan. He's no longer censoring his personality or hiding his neurodivergence. He talks openly about his challenges, his losses, and his weirdness. This authenticity has created a loyal fandom that is more like a community than a consumer base. The industry experts who claimed he was done after the BGT hype died down have been proven spectacularly wrong. He didn't fail, he evolved. He took the shocking path of choosing his own sanity over a traditional career, and in doing so, he's created a blueprint for other artists who feel trapped by the reality TV stigma. The shy teenager from 2012 has finally found his voice, and ironically, it's much louder now that he stopped trying to shout over the noise of the fame machine. Is Jonathan Antoine a cautionary tale of the price of fame, or the ultimate success story for the modern age? As we conclude our investigative report on Jonathan Antoine, we're left with a provocative question. For years, the narrative was that he was a has-been, a flash in the pan who couldn't handle the pressure. But looking at the evidence from 2026, we have to ask, who really won? Is it the artist who stays on the treadmill, churning out the same safe music until they burn out? Or is it the man who had the courage to step off, face his demons, embrace his diagnosis, and build his own empire from the ruins of his former life? Jonathan Antoine's story is a reminder that success isn't always a straight line. Sometimes, the most important turn you can take is the one that leads you away from the crowd and back to yourself. He's proven that even after the most brutal accusations of being difficult or the shocking truth of his mental health struggles, there is a path forward. He's no longer the shy boy with the big voice. He's a pioneer of the independent music movement. As he moves forward into 2026 and beyond, his story serves as a beacon for anyone who has ever felt like they didn't fit the mold. Jonathan didn't just survive the Britain's Got Talent curse, he broke it. And as the final notes of his latest work echo, one thing is clear. The most unexpected part of his journey isn't where he ended up, but how much he had to lose to finally find himself.